All right, welcome to the 2020 Business About the Recreation Summit. My name is Sheena Pate. I'm the project coordinator for the Crown of the Continent Geotourism Council. And it is our absolute pleasure to partner with Montana Governor's Office of Outdoor Recreation for the third year. This is the second full summit, so we're very excited to partner with them again. And then we have Montana Trails Coalition, so Bob Walker, he is another co-host for this summit. So just a couple quick housekeeping. I'll put things in the chat box too. So I will be behind the scenes and then Calvin will be behind the scenes. So if you have any technical issues, you can privately message Calvin or myself in the chat box. So just select my name, Sheena Pate, and I can get those answered. We'll just be behind the scenes, making sure it flows from that end. A couple of housekeeping. This is a recorded session. We will repost it. It usually takes about a day. It takes about 4 hours for us to repost it. So we'll get that up as soon as possible. If you have any questions or resources, we absolutely welcome you to submit those in the chat box. And during this presentation portion of the panel, we ask that you have your microphones muted. And then when we get to the Q&A portion, if we're able to, the attendee list will probably be pretty large for this one. So depending how it works, we'll either unmute you or Randy will reference the chat box to ask those questions. So with that, I just want to thank you all for being here. You make up the summit, you make this possible. We couldn't do it without you, and are very appreciative of the community that you have created. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Randy, who's moderating this panel. And thank you for being here.
Great, thanks, Sheena. I'll just take one thumbs up from somebody that you can hear me. Thanks. So my name is Randy Arnold, and I'm the Regional Supervisor for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and moderator for this panel discussion. And super glad to have been asked to be the moderator and really glad to be with you guys here today. Before we get started, I do need to share with you some sad news. So one of our invited panelists, Tony Banovich of Missoula, passed away on Tuesday night. Many of you knew Tony and his amazing energy and passion for running and his leadership in Missoula, as well as the outdoor recreation community. In fact, as we were preparing for this summit, that's why I asked him to participate. He's such an important part of the Missoula community, and he had worked so hard, not only just in preparing these running events and things in response to emergencies, but he really had a vision for how the outdoor community played a role in building resiliency, and really worked hard to prepare the Missoula community to respond to unexpected challenges. So in short, Tony most certainly will be missed. So if you will, please join me, and we're going to just take a couple moments of silence here in recognition for our loss and for our loss of Tony. Great. Thank you all for allowing that for a couple of seconds. So I think what we'll work on really first here is introducing the panelists, and then I can take a minute to talk a bit about our subject today. To kick this off, I'm first going to turn to Brett Wuth. Brett, do you mind starting us off on the introductions?
Sure. I'm so sorry to hear about Tony's loss there. I'm Brett Wuth. I'm the director of the Pincher Creek Regional Emergency Management Organization, which is a partnership of 3 local governments in the southwest corner of Alberta. So that means that we've got prairies, lakes, rivers, forests, mountains, and sort of all of the recreation options that come with that. I'm responsible for planning for disasters and major emergencies in the area. And as such, I coordinate the first response agencies and the community organizations that are either affected or involved in helping to respond to those major events. Over the last, I'd say last 2 decades, we've had some pretty significant major events. We've had a couple of wildfires, so forest fires, also prairie fires as well. We've had floods. We get major floods every 2 to 3 years. We've had some multi-day blizzards that have just shut down the whole area. And there's been some industrial chemical releases. And of course, what we're dealing with right now is COVID-19. So that really connects, I think, with the theme of how emergencies are impacting the outdoor industry and activities. My background, before I got into emergency management and carrying on even to the present, is search and rescue. Connections to the topics. Really, I'm involved in integrating cross-community plans for disasters. I help to review the emergency response plans of recreation organizations. And during responses to major emergencies and disasters, we often are recruiting the experts and those people that have local knowledge in responding to those emergencies. So that can often be people that have knowledge of particular activities or particular areas, front country and back country. So that gives a sense of my background.
Great, thanks, Brett. Let's go to Donna.
Morning, everyone. My name is Donna Gaukler. I'm the director of City of Missoula Parks and Recreation. We have a very robust program and a extensive open space conservation land system surrounding the city and along our riparian corridors. 600 acres of developed parklands, ranging from everything from water parks and sports fields and band shells and event centers to very passive use areas. We also manage the primary commuter system, trail system for active transportation, as well as trails paved all the way to single track. In addition to that, we have the urban forest and a very strong recreation program service delivery team. I've been in the field of parks and recreation all of my career, so I am a true believer in renewal through the outdoors and through play. And our connection, or my connection to the COVID-19 pandemic is really right from the beginning. The governor's orders, even during shelter in place, was that the outdoors is an essential service. And I think we all realized how very essential that access was during the pandemic and continues to be. We have seen increase in at least 20% across the system throughout. And at times we were seeing increases of 30 to 40% users in the open space systems and on the trails, a literal crowding of trails. We felt that as an essential service from the beginning, during shelter in place, while schools were closed and doing remote learning only. We discovered that instead of having approximately 20,000 people per weekend playing sports and or going to festivals, those folks were on our open spaces and in the trail systems. And they weren't necessarily experienced, if you will, users of open space, parks, and trails. And so there was an immense amount of messaging and etiquette that we not only needed to teach, but had opportunity to provide some normalization, if you will, and etiquette and understanding of the outdoors, understanding the pandemic, how to keep yourself safe. So that's been our involvement from an open space perspective. And when it came time to reopen to the public, we were among the first to provide youth program services through day-long camps and literally made it all the way through summer without a case. I can't say the same now that everybody's back in school. But again, it's part of the pandemic and learning how to work together with our partners and our public in providing the best services possible and in a very safe and sort of educational way.
Great, thanks, Donna. Let's go to Racene.
Hi, everyone. My name is Racene Friede. I'm the president and CEO of Glacier Country Regional Tourism Commission. We are a destination marketing organization. And destination marketing is the promotion of a place with the sole purpose of bringing visitors to that place. Glacier Country is one of the 6 tourism regions in the state of Montana. We have the 8 counties of Northwest Montana. There's 75 communities there. And we help with talking. In our normal year, we talk to non-residents, and we get them to come here, spend their money, and go home. And my background has been in tourism marketing pretty much since I got out of college. Did 7 or 6 years with Bozeman Chamber of Commerce. I jumped into a career in telecommunications at Blackfoot, and I jumped back into Glacier Country. My background with crisis communication has generally been with a wildland fire and air quality and smoke. We're very, very familiar with wildland fire. We've been put through quite a few tough years, especially in the last 12 or 13. And we generally are talking to the non-residents. We trigger that plan when a visitor's experience is going to be impacted, either by safety, perceived or actual safety, or air quality. This last year, our crisis communications structure was put to the test in that we had to trigger it, but we had to add a bunch more audiences to it. Instead of talking to non-residents, we pivoted and we talked to the residents, our businesses, the people that are on the ground. We were telling our non-residents to not come. And so we were trying to help our businesses weather the storm. We were trying to keep our communities safe. And we were also trying to figure out how in the world we're going to help our communities come out of this economically as well, because we all have to recover to some extent. But this has been tough, and crisis communication is key to that. Unfortunately, we are in a constant state of crisis communication now. So this conversation today is, I'm really pleased to be a part of it, and I look forward to a lot of the conversation and the questions.
Great, thanks, Racene. And finally, Todd.
Good morning. My name is Todd Frank. I own the Trailhead, as I call it now, family of stores in Missoula. We have our main store downtown. It's been here since 1974. And then I have a new boat store in Midtown, as well as a women's, mostly women's apparel store in our mall. And, you know, I sort of scratched my head initially when Randy asked me to be on the panel, because I wasn't sure I felt a little undergunned in this company with people who are doing the kinds of things that you folks are. But, you know, the more I thought about it, what I recognize is what we do here is, you know, we're a first line with recreationalists in a lot of cases, as is Donna, and I think we all are at some level. You know, and we have endured things changing in the economy, or changing in our ability to recreate outdoors every day we show up for work. And so what I thought a lot about it, you know, and for me, the pandemic situation has really been, it's really brought into light how we make decisions here and how we react to changing environmental conditions. You know, we had 2 things going on at our apparel store downtown, and our gear was incredibly slow. We closed for about a month downtown, almost a month. To year to date, our apparel sales for men and women are off about 50%. But our gear sales, on the other hand, the actual tools to go out and recreate with were either at where we were in previous years, or in the case of boating, in the new boating store, where we've exceeded all of our expectations for what our ability to do things in terms of selling boats and selling paddle boards and that sort of thing. And I think what I recognized, is that we've been reacting to things, like Brett was talking about all the different kinds of emergencies that they've had in their world. We have situations where the water temps are too high to fish. We have situations where we have too much water to go boating. We have not enough snow, too much snow, forest fires, closures and smoke closures. And so recreationalists have been working through those things for a very long time, trying to find places to go and to do things that they want to do. And as a retailer, we're oftentimes the very first place they call. They call us to say, where can we go boating? We know the river is closed because there's a forest fire. And so we end up sort of being this conduit of information exchange with that frontline consumer. And, the more I thought about it, I realized that that's a very valuable resource in this process of trying to adjust to changing, whether it's a pandemic or a fire or anything else. So, that's kind of what we do. And we do it every day. We walk in the door, we open up and the phone rings and we take that first phone call and we try to push people along. I think for me that what I'm going to get out of this is that there's going to be a better way for me to get information from Randy or from Donna about what's actually happening out there and be a better conduit to the consumer at the end. So I think it's a really cool role. I'm thrilled to be on it. I feel like I'll get more out of this than everybody that's involved. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Well, I'm sure that won't be the case, although I'm with you. As any participant in these knows, you often learn as much as you hope to deliver. So the one I want to start a little by introducing myself. I didn't spend much on that in the beginning. So I do, as the regional supervisor for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, I have a long history in law enforcement. The first 20 years of my career, I was a state game warden bouncing around the state. But in the last 7-8 years, I've had an opportunity both in incident command training, but also being asked to participate in responses to emergencies. I served as incident commander when we had our first detection of draceniid mussels in the state, that mussel response that led to a legislative proposal that increased the state's response to mussels and the potential for mussels coming into a $14 million biennium program. But served on that. And then more recently during this COVID response, I was asked to help Fish, Wildlife, and Parks on a statewide team. We called it Incident Command Light, but it was really just helping be the conduit for answering questions and delivering information and providing guidance and trying to connect to the governor's orders and knowing how our staff would respond to incidents, including keeping fishing access sites and state parks open, and how do we manage and keep things clean? How do we sell licenses and non-resident permit applications for big game opportunities in the midst of a pandemic when we're shutting down offices, and critical business elements, and what are those priorities? So it's not unusual then, as I approach this subject, the subject of our panel is strategies to managing recreation use during times of emergency. It would have been really easy for me to ask panelists with the experience that Brett has in emergency response incident command systems, or Donna as a member in the city and actually being on those teams as multi-agency community teams and building these communication strategies and making decisions on what's open and what's not. But I didn't want to just jump to that. I think if those who are attending this were hoping to get a lot of incident command structure background, I just know your agencies and your communities are steeped in that. But I don't want to shortchange that. So as you have questions, be sure to let me know if you have specific questions on there, because we have some heavy hitters on this panel in those areas. But I was hoping to ask and invite a broader conversation around how does the community respond to these issues? And then you see Racene's role in here and Todd's role, and that the real magic between how does a government entity deliver this, but the real community is responding and reacting to all of us. And therefore I'm going to aim to try to tease out some of those details on resiliency and building resiliency and preparation for emergency response, and trying to find those elements that are common regardless of the emergency response. Naturally, we're going to look at the most recent COVID reaction as being something we can very close at hand on how we responded to certain things, but hopefully those key elements will transcend just the most emergent response. So with that, I want to move to my my first question, which both Racene and Todd jumped on a little out of the gate, which I thought was really wise, is just this idea of communication. And there's two ways that we can go at this, but I think I'll start with the more general question. As we were working through this most recent pandemic, were there some elements regarding communication that you thought were critical to the effectiveness on how we communicated? Or as we got our stride, that we learned to communicate better? What were some elements that you guys saw that were really important?
I'll jump on that one. One of the key things that we realized that we could not do is we couldn't go dark. We had to keep our communication lines open. And so literally the first week that COVID happened, we were reaching out to our partners, whether it was business partners or industry partners or public land partners. And we continue to have these weekly meetings, and we're constantly sharing about what's going on. We're taking that information and then we're putting it out there. And you just have to keep that up. And whether it's traditional partners or new partners, you just have to keep talking, keep sharing, and keep communicating, and not hold anything back. This is a really important time to be honest and transparent with everyone, because we're all in this together, and we're only going to come out of this together if we're strong as a community.
Yeah, I think it's really important to maintain that trust in communications. And to do that, you have to be open and honest and say what you know, and also say that you don't know the stuff that you don't know. So yeah, I'd reflect that. And also that notion of having a really wide partnership in developing your communications. So, we're talking with business, we're talking with different levels of government, we're talking with the people that are impacted to see what is the messaging that needs to get out there, and to make sure that we're consistent and common messaging in that.
I would say that my experience was really, I guess it was really interesting. The first, I was out of the country and I came back. We didn't talk about COVID at all. I came back, and on the flight home, I started reading emails and getting caught up, and it was clear that something was going to happen. And the night that I got home, I got a call from a friend of mine in Missoula who's a physician, and she asked me what my plan was. Did I have a plan? Was I prepared to close the business for a period of time? That they were kind of trying to work through that. And I think what they had done is, as a group of physicians in the community, they were almost ahead of sort of the governmental response to it, in that they wanted to lean on us a little bit and say, what are you going to do? And so the next morning, my first real day back in the office, I met with the staff, and we ended up having an all staff meeting that night and said, look, I don't know where this is going to go, but it looks like there's going to be some things that are going to happen fairly quickly here. And then we basically said, here's our format to communicate with you as a staff. We use something called Slack. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, and it's a really useful tool that allows you to post stuff. And so we started posting updates of what we knew as soon as we could. By the next morning, I met with all my buyers, because we're dealing really with multiple seasons at the same time. We have incoming product for spring. We're trying to sell off, discount and sell off our winter product, as well as writing product for the next winter, so that the buyers are living in sort of three different worlds at once. And so I made them stop everything they were doing and communicate with all of our vendors to say, don't send us any more product unless we approve it first. So put every order we have on hold. And that process alone took about 3 days to communicate that with every vendor. And then we started sort of working into the future at that point. But I would say that developing the way that we communicated with our staff, and then after that happened, the way that we communicated with our vendors and our customers really set the tone for how we were going to have to deal with it. So I found it to me, it was all about communication when it happened. It wasn't, we could only do what we could do, and we had to be honest about where we were, where we were at. And it was interesting, a lot of our vendors, when we first started the process of putting our orders on hold, were like, you're overreacting. You don't need to do that. You're totally overreacting. And you know, and I said, that's fine. We'll still take the product if we can. We just want to give it a heads up before we do. And it turned out within a week or 5 or 6 days of that period, it was clear that we were going to get shut down for some significant period of time, and it was going to be a much bigger deal. So I felt like fast, immediate decision-making was really important, and transparency with customers, vendors, and my staff. So
early on, one of the things we did here at Parks and Recreation is we began researching as recent of information as we could, because the information wasn't coming fast enough to make good decisions. And the other thing we did, or I guess the path I followed, is our staff has significant interaction with the public, whether they're in maintenance or recreation. And I felt that if our staff was competent and confident, that would extend to our customers, and that the more people we could reach with accurate information, very simple messaging, and expectations, that would essentially pass a thread throughout the community among all of our users as to proper protocols during a pandemic. And I think that worked. We used an ambassador program, we used signage, and we used a lot of education and role modeling. And I'll leave it at that for the next question.
Well, I've got a question. What is your ambassador program? It sounds interesting.
We had a number of recreation employees during shutdown that we realized are key to our success throughout the summer. And if we were not able to continue to employ them, we would lose them and lose our entire summer and the program services for families. So what we did is we quickly developed an ambassador program that had 2 primary messages: etiquette on open space and trails and in parks, what is appropriate, what is distancing, when to wear masks, all of that. And the other component is what is appropriate for the environment. We were finding unauthorized trail development all over the place. We had a significant increase of unsheltered homeless throughout our entire park system. And so learning how to wade our way through mental health issues, a lot of fear among citizens about being close to somebody, and therefore I need my own trail, despite what I might be treading across or what habitat I might be damaging. And so those one-on-ones with good role modeling kept our folks employed, very, very knowledgeable, and also grew that, I think, wealth of knowledge throughout the community.
So one of the things that I think is interesting when I think about responding to these emergency situations is the nature of these tends to be different for every event. So whatever emergency event we're responding to, but if there's one thing common, whether it's fire or smoke or a pandemic, is that you can be darn sure about the time you figure out exactly what you want to communicate, it's already changed. And the public's expectation that the message be consistent and be clear and be a metronome of this is exactly what you need to do is often unwound by the fact that it's a constantly changing message. Did you guys see, at least in our most recent response, or have you identified strategies to keep up with the current message? And at the same time, how do you deal with a pandemic that's been this long term around message fatigue? How do you know that you're delivering the most current message and not overwhelming and just getting to the point where people are just tuning you out?
Yeah, that's a tough balance. The thinking that we've had, and I don't know if we've got strong data to support it, but the thinking is that we really need to be communicating frequently. And we've developed, core messages, and I'm sure they're the same ones that you've heard before, these key messages that we keep returning to, and then just expressing them in different ways, or expressing different ideas and returning to how that relates to those key messages. So we get statistics of how many cases there are in our area that are published by the provincial government. And then we get questions about, well, where exactly are those cases? And so that becomes an opportunity to discuss, well, it's not actually the confirmed cases that we need to be concerned about, because they're already self-isolating, and we are tracing all the close contacts of those people. So it's the untested and unconfirmed cases that need to be concerned about. And to protect yourself from that, we return to our key messages of, maintaining that physical distance of 2 meters or 6 feet, making sure that you're doing proper hand hygiene and washing your hands before you touch your face, that kind of stuff. So it's an opportunity to return back to those key messages.
I think one of the things we did is those groups, those weekly meetings that we have, or bi-weekly meetings, we were constantly talking about that messaging and making sure that we were all on the same page. And even to this day, the Department of Commerce, Office of Tourism and Business Development has created a Montana Aware safety campaign utilizing Montana Care money. And they've partnered with all the destination marketing organizations across the state. We're taking all those different pieces, and they're very simple. There's just certain key messages, and we are all sharing that exact same message and distributing that across the state. We don't want to overwhelm it. We want to keep it simple, but it's there, and it's in front of people. But again, I think it's communicating and making sure we're all consistent and not going rogue, going off in a different direction.
I don't know that what we did was going rogue, but I think what we attempted to do was to talk to people. We shifted our whole advertising and outreach that we do through social media. We quit talking about products and quit talking about, the things that we had been talking about. And we started talking about, how to recreate safely in the outdoors, and not going to places where there was a ton of other people, and utilizing all these other stretches of river that were around Missoula that were maybe not getting as much pressure on them, and really talking to people about, this may not be the time to go attempt that really hard rock climb that you've wanted to do your whole life, and, not putting yourself in excess amount of danger. We talked, ad nauseum about wearing your PFDs on the river and just not putting other people at risk because of decisions that you were making. And we've kind of left the messaging about, 6 foot spacing and wearing masks up to the other people who were doing that. I didn't feel like people needed to hear that from us as much as they did, hey, where can we go and how do we do it safely? And we tried to just continue to push that message out. So people got tired of me saying, wear your PFD. I know that.
I think our approach was similar. We really wanted, the message was consistent, getting people to think about this in the long term, and that that we all want this quality of life related to outdoors and the outdoor recreation environment to continue. And so how do we do that successfully? I think everybody's been spot on. The businesses that I saw be more successful, including the agencies that I saw having greater success, were those that quickly jumped on the message, were consistent with it, were transparent with that information, but they told you how to do it, how to get through it safely. They quickly had the markings on the floor. They were very quick to have online order and pickup. And that started building a lot of confidence in the community. And I think those businesses to this day are likely more successful than those who have sort of dragged their feet or refused to recognize that the pandemic is a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing. And what I have seen more than anything is folks were active outdoors. I think they were generally happy and joyful for those experiences. Certainly there was crowding at trailheads and river access points. But there was also a lot of respect. I do see some changes as we go into winter and our need to be even more creative about how we do things over the winter and make sure that the new normal is all about enjoying the great outdoors.
So So one of the things that I was seeing when we were preparing for this is just this amazing connection between it. And I guess I should back up a little. You know, when you think about these emergency responses, it's really easy to look at the governor's role or the local health department or the community's role to set these standards. But the effectiveness in any community has just a massive amount to do with how everybody participates. And Donna, your point to those businesses that didn't look at a way to buck this, but look at a way to be in alignment with it and support it. Or Todd, your messaging where you recognize there's a difference between allowing this more governmental space for that messaging, but here's where I can speak to the hearts of the people that are using it. I think that's really cool to see that those connect, and which is a nice segue to my next question, which is those, as you think about this larger community response to emergencies and a community response to managing recreation use during these times of emergency, what value do you place on, and any strategies for how communities respond to emergency situations?
I would certainly jump right into that. I think the thing that we experienced was, at least at the very, very front end of it, it took a few weeks or even maybe a couple weeks before we got this sort of unified messaging from the community. So, you know, there's some posters. I had one on my desk. I don't have it here anymore. That basically we're going by these community rules or ways to operate our business. And it was a total confidence builder when consumers could go from business to business or restaurant to outdoor store to anywhere else and see everybody was subscribing to the same set of standards for behavior. And that messaging, I felt like that messaging really had to come, you know, from one central place and be distributed out, or from an organization. And to me, that was the most useful thing, because initially it felt like everybody was kind of doing their own thing, and there was, you know, consumers were very apprehensive about even being in your store until they saw that sort of consistent messaging that was coming. You know, for us, I think there was an organization, and Donna probably knows better than I do, within the community that was a sort of consortium of people that put that out. And it was very helpful for us. I mean, it made a huge difference in terms of people's willingness to come in the store and our ability to sort of say, this is what we're doing. These are the standards that everybody thinks we should be following. So for me, that was super important.
One of the things I really appreciate about Missoula is how quickly the multi-agency, multi-government, multidisciplinary sectors came together. For a long time, it was for daily meetings to understand the numbers, to understand the best practices. But very, very quickly, as soon as end of April, we were already meeting with economic partnership and businesses to develop protocols for health department review, for consistency with best practices on all of that reopening. We were already meeting with childcare providers, educators, university systems, hospitals, so that we were indeed all getting to the same page as quickly as possible. And one of the things I really enjoyed with that large group of folks, basically it was, reopening Missoula during a pandemic was the role. It was a very broad representation of all socioeconomics, all demographics, all backgrounds. And I think that was helpful to a shared message throughout the Missoula community, which landed to that sense of comfort and willingness to go back out into the community, and because we needed to make sure our businesses survive through this. It's critical for all of us.
I see it as essential to have a really broad community engagement to be able to respond to any kind of disaster that impacts the community broadly. And so you have to have everyone at the table there. So for us, that, was the responders, the multiple aspects of healthcare, but also, police and fire and social services. And then those organizations that represented people that were at high risk. So like schools and seniors facilities, women's shelters. And then the ones that were being impacted by the restrictions, like the businesses, Chamber of Commerce, different levels of provincial government, local government, our industry, utilities and parks. And then one of the things that I saw that was different with this one, which might be because it's such a long-term disaster, is that we're seeing new organizations forming and organizations taking on new roles that they haven't had before. So our food bank reformed. It was overwhelmed by the initial expectations. So the community got together and formed a new food bank and has taken on a much more significant role. The Chamber of Commerce was a member-only organization initially, and they said that for this event, they're going to be serving all businesses in the community, regardless of whether they're a member, and they're providing those services, and they got some grants to be able to support that. Search and Rescue took on the role of coordinating the delivery of food to those people that were self-isolated, a role that they would not normally have. Daycare was coordinating with being able to open to provide childcare for those essential workers so that they could carry on and do stuff because of our restrictions. So that was a very interesting aspect. I wonder if anyone else saw that.
Actually, that's a really great point, Brett. In terms of the communities, what we found is, you know, we've been for months been hearing everything from the federal government. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this. And when we started reaching out with this Montana Aware campaign and safety campaign, we realized it's only going to be successful if it's embraced by influencers at the community level. And so when we reached out to them and asked for their assistance to help with that messaging, suddenly we found this groundswell, and they embraced that. And now we're seeing the success of that messaging far greater than if it was me going out asking to do that. So communities have to take the leadership of helping their own communities.
So not to ask a rhetorical question, but for any given response, how do you know what your community is? And when do you build that?
You know, I think it's different. We look at the tourism community, we look at corridors, we look at businesses. You know, there's a tourism industry, there's their outdoor recreation sector, but I think that's tough. And when we reached out to, say, the Economic Development Corporation in Sanders County, they're the entire county, and allowing them as that influencer, people who have a lot of influence in an entire area, and they took ownership of that and led that initiative. And we're just the conduit now between where the information's coming and them distributing it. But I think it varies.
Yeah, as we were preparing for this, there was a piece that came up that I thought was really interesting. The time to build new partnerships. I mean, these events always create new partnerships. They create new businesses. They create new ways to handle issues. Parties who previously were unengaged became engaged, and you build new relationships and you forge those connections. But the interesting piece that I remember you guys talking about is just the role of a standing conversation among community members, a more regular understanding among community members built before the emergency happens. And those communication channels with who are those influencers in the community, and that's hard to maintain. It's hard to do that by proxy, or to do it just in case we need it someday, but rather there's a spirit or energy around, we're all involved in this. And what I found really interesting in our conversation is that to do that well, it means you have partnership with folks who you traditionally may not be working with. And you find ways to align and stay connected to folks and businesses and community members. And not because it only serves you today, but because there will be this need for us to be better connected, which it's hard to do, but certainly worth it. So before I shift to our last question, I just want to remind folks that if they have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. In a few minutes here, we are going to move to a more formal question and answer if you have them. one question that I wanted to ask that's come up a lot is this idea, and this is kind of multi-pronged because we're talking about recreation use and managing recreation use. Yet what we all saw, and I think what we all understood very quickly, and certainly the governor's orders regarding lockdown and restrictions kept open recreation. And we found very quickly that recreation served an important role in keeping people able to manage stress and able to manage the impact of COVID and these very significant changes in our lives. So I want to talk a little bit about stress and stress management and the impact of emergencies on managing. And this can go a few directions. It's certainly, again, that recreation broadly served a role in helping people, but sometimes those who are most involved in keeping these things running end up absorbing a massive amount of impact from this. Any insights on what you guys saw during the pandemic from your own response, or what you saw in others regarding stress and stress management? And maybe towards the end, we might shift that towards some strategies and making sure that we implement things that we learn.
We saw a good amount of stress and continue to, particularly among our employees. You know, employees are coming to work every day. They have all the way through. And the community relies on us to keep facilities and programs open, operating, and safe. And we don't have the control that we would like. And it just, even a question that has already come forward is, you know, while we had a lot of common ground, if you will, in Missoula, that's not the case throughout the state. And we see our sports teams literally leaving Missoula to travel to other counties to play under different rules, which some of those activities are very stressful to all kinds of folks who are trying to stay safe, and stressful to those families who cannot participate in sports the way they once did. The stress among our employees, we largely dealt with through at least weekly meetings, frequent trainings and retrainings, reminders. To this day, we continue to encourage and empower folks to be able to address directly their peer in best practices. You all are familiar with the face masks dropping and those sorts of things. But some other stresses that we saw, because schools had been closed for a good amount of time, our recreation staff had a number of incidents during the first couple of weeks of camps, because they were the first adults outside of the household to be spending time with those children. And we were dealing with, you know, certain issues that we're not typically faced with. Initially, kids didn't know what to do with structure. And they went from quiet and either compliant or completely not to so overstimulated. And we were also seeing some signs of abuse in households or lack of food. And so we had close relationships with the food bank and the mental health services. And that's really difficult. Recreation leaders aren't often trained in all these areas of important social services. So I think that stress continues to be there. And our ability as leaders to sometimes have to take on a very strong leadership role and make decisions and you know, provide direction that's pretty succinct. Our environment here at Parks and Recreation is usually very much consensus building, team sharing, and there were times we just simply had to make strong decisions at a leadership level to ensure the employees and the public that we heard them and that and we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. But that was some of our folks, you know, stress and response to that stress.
Yeah, I see the stress as being something that the whole planet is experiencing. It's something that you know, almost every person on this planet is under stress, and it's something that we really haven't seen since the last World War. So with that comes a need for us to change our expectations of each other, and this has been sort of messaging internally, but also messages we're giving externally, which is, you know, we want to be more patient, to be tolerant, to be kind to each other. I've heard it said that they're really anticipating that there's going to be a second pandemic that comes out of this, which is the mental health aspects of it. And we need to be prepared to start to deal with that. And part of that is sort of focusing on what you can control. So, you know, those basic kinds of training that we give for emergency responders are the same kinds of things that we can be saying to everyone, which is maintain your human connections, talk to people, eat well, sleep well, and have regular exercise, which is, you know, what that outdoor experience gives us.
Yeah, keeping up communications, relationships. It's not often in our world of marketing that we have to integrate, be kind, be patient, and be respectful. And we're having to literally save that because there's a lot of chaos in the world, whether it's COVID or something else. And we need people to remember that we're all human and we're all in this together and we're all tired. And we just need to keep that in mind as we're moving through this. But yeah, we have to be there for each other, and we just have to keep communicating that message.
You know, I would just add one comment, and that is that the experience that we've had as retailers, again, dealing with people from outside of Missoula traveling here versus people within the community, and my staff level of stress has been very high for those frontline people. And you know, we've had people just simply say, we can't do this. I'm not going to deal with somebody from XYZ that won't wear their mask when they come in the store. And so we've been through a lot of that sort of, you know, how to help people deal with that. And, you know, the sort of theme that keeps coming up with my staff that we talk a lot about is that as a society, since World War II, we've become incredibly self-absorbed, and we're not willing to you know, take one for the team if that has any negative impact on our personal beliefs or personal belief structure. And that's super challenging right now. And I think that there's going to be a reckoning, you know, that level of self-absorption that we've been able to have for a very long time is, I think it's you know, it's shining its light now very strongly, you know, to directly, you know, talk to Lindsay, you know, of people who don't live in our community and don't have the same maybe self-absorbed ideals that we do in Missoula, because we're all self-absorbed. It's just a matter of what we individually find important. And, you know, I talk to my staff a lot about that is, look, you know, you have to be willing to accept that other people in the world don't look at the world the way you do, but you have to hold them to the standard that if they're going to shop in our store and they want to be part of our world, that they have to live by the rules that we set for our store. And, you know, we've made lots of people mad and chased lots of people out of our store and got a lot of, you know, as they walked out the door. And I'm kind of okay with that. You know, I feel like that empowered my staff to feel like their communication was actually having an impact on somebody. You know, maybe negatively me, but it was impacting someone. So.
I think the other thing too is we saw a whole other outdoor recreationists that we're not familiar with this year. These are people who have never done it before. They were escaping their own unsafe or perceived environments, and they came here, went to Wyoming, wherever. They're seeking ways to be safe, perceived or actual, but they were unprepared. And when they came in, they were not very nice. They were not very responsible. They were not the typical nice visitor that we're used to dealing with, and that kind of put us on guard, and put our staff and our communities on guard. And so there's this tension now that we've not seen before, and that's hard too, because we're going to have to come out of that on the other side. I think we were talking about this earlier. How many of those people are actually going to continue to be outdoor recreationists? Well, there's probably quite a few that are like, oh my gosh, I've been missing this my entire life. I'm now, this is what I want to do. And there's other people are going to go, I'm going back to my other interests. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that we're going to be dealing with in the long term here. None of this is just going to go away.
We've seen 4 times increase in the number of search and rescue callouts that happened since the lockdown opened up again and people went back into the wilderness.
Well, in our public lands, whether it's state parks or Forest Service or our national parks, they really had their hands full this year. And we really appreciated them being so open with us and telling us what was going on so that we could try to put information out in front of people, what to expect, what to do, how do you put out a campfire, you know, all of that kind of information. But again, it was them helping communicate what those challenges were on the ground. You know, and we couldn't make it go away, but we did our darndest to help get out in front of it as much as we could.
And Todd, you alluded to Lindsay's question. I do want to take this opportunity to shift towards a question and answer period if folks have them, but maybe direct the panelists' attention to that first question that popped up there. I'll paraphrase here that Missoula, and there are places outside of Missoula where COVID is blowing up and is worse than ever. And I react to that a little personally in that, man, I don't know if that's true anymore because, man, Missoula's cases are definitely up. But acknowledging that that there are people who are refusing to listen to government agencies, and government agencies and community leaders have not been consistent and urgent. Any thoughts as to your experience with this? And if so, how you deal with it?
I almost think it has to be done on an individual by individual basis, that you have to invest the time of listening to what the person is saying and give them time to explain things from their perspective, and eventually they'll want to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, that's hard given the pace and scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
I think our approach has been, you know, similar to what Todd described. We tried from the very beginning to be very, very clear about our expectations. And in some cases, some of those may have been even more, stricter than the health officer and certainly than the governor's office. It was important to me from the beginning to make sure that our employees felt safe and that they were first, because without them, we can't serve anyone. And they truly needed to be confident in their communications with the public. And by setting those expectations really early on, we certainly want and have made every attempt and effort to be completely respectful. It's unfortunate, as we all know, that politics has played a large role in people's positioning around best practices related to the science. But I think it's important to acknowledge those and to recognize that that exists, to say, I understand. And at the same time, my job here is to make sure our employees and every guest who visits us is not going to be exposed because we weren't careful with in every way that we could be.
You know, and I would just make the comment to Lindsay that it's definitely not just outside of Missoula. I certainly have spent some time outside of Missoula and understand that, you know, again, it becomes sort of a political thing where people have a perspective that it's maybe government overreach or whatever. But, you know, my business is located right in the center of downtown Missoula. And, you know, I have a 478 bed student housing project that's about 75 feet from my front door. And it's called Roam, and we've affectionately named it Roaming for COVID on one side of me. And then on the other side, I have a small deli who had to close for about 3 weeks because they had a blow up of staff members there. And, you know, so we're seeing it right in the center of the community of Missoula. And it's an age thing for a lot of, you know, I would say that maybe that's an overstatement, but we're seeing a lot of younger people who are not taking it as seriously as older people. And we're seeing a lot of people on one end of the political spectrum who aren't taking it as seriously as people on the other end of the political spectrum are. And both of those have the same challenges. They're not unique. And talking to people, you know, it's the same discussion that you have to have. It's, you know, it's challenging. And, you know, I think at the end, trying to get the entire country on board with something is going to be super challenging given how polarized we are right now. And I think that's a leadership thing that has to come from, you know, from one point in the federal government, and we haven't had much of that. And so I think that's sort of allowed what you allude to happening, you know, based on sort of rural versus urban, perhaps, or young versus old. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can shake it, but it's super challenging for sure. And we're trying to be super consistent with that message we give our customers that walk through the door, regardless of whether they're a 21-year-old college student or whether they're somebody from Ravalli County who is not interested in you know, what we think in Missoula. So.
Great. Yeah. So the one piece, just from my own maybe anecdotal or looking at the big picture, it seemed as if when we were moving initially into the pandemic, there was an amazing attention and focus and global look towards it, as well as community. And I think our agencies, whether at the governor's level or the more community level, had that momentum and the focus and the attention, and it was darned effective. When we moved to lockdown, we had a lot of support for that, and there was a lot of understanding, and that lasted for a long time and then waned, and it waned. And so you start seeing, and then with the calculated and controlled opening of things, I just have this kind of chaos theory mindset as I look at this very controlled thing, and you start to release it out, and you don't know which way and how broad and how fast that's going to go. But now that it's gone, trying to rein that back in has been particularly challenging. And what I'm hearing from you is throughout this, there's been an effort to look at the recreational user and the individual user to their individual responsibilities, look to those businesses to share that message of how to be effective in this new environment. And those who have adopted that really quickly are really successful, and they've figured out a way to make that happen. And so I appreciate that eye towards, you know, the government can tell you these things, but you have this personal responsibility to each other, and this way that we're going to recreate on the trails, and this way that we're going to operate on the rivers, and this, I mean, those kinds of things and those messages from you as community leaders seems to be effective, at least in those circles that I run in with. So I want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to ask a question if they have one. We certainly have a few more minutes here. I'm not going to pick on anybody, but I see a couple folks out there in the audience participating who had a front row seat to managing some very significant and impactful areas of responsibility. And so I welcome any insights or thoughts from those who are attending this panel to offer your own insights on topics that we've discussed as well.
And Randy, if you do get wild and do you want to call out anyone's name, I can try to unmute them, and maybe they will.
Okay.
Maybe they will voluntarily share. I don't know, but yeah, I can try to do that on my end.
Yeah, I was cautious because it didn't seem particularly fair for me to pick on somebody. Oh, we do have a question from Brian. Thanks, Brian. So, so what role does social media play in emergency response? How does a community use and manage this communication media, given that almost anyone can say anything?
Yeah, so that's been really central to our developing experience over the last few years. And I'm not a strong, I don't participate in social media myself, but I recognize how important it is that we are communicating through social media, and that we have the people there that have that experience. And that's a daily, almost, you know, hourly kind of engagement that needs to be there.
Yeah, that's a big part of what we do. And right off the bat, I think our safety messaging started to be integrated in every single thing that we did on social and all of our different channels beginning in April with the shelter in place, because we were telling people to stay away. And then as those messages changed, every single one of our posts actually has the safety messaging integrated into it. I'll admit, we've had some people not be happy with us and have gone after our social. But for the most part, we try to stay away from the negativity and just concentrate on the positive stuff.
Racene, what were you finding that people were going after you?
Masks. They just don't like masks.
Yeah.
And we there's some imagery out there that we were using that triggered people. And so we had to, we have a zero tolerance on our social channels for hate or, bad language and that kind of stuff. So we shut that down, but we did reevaluate what was triggering it. But we stayed on par in terms of the messaging. It says social distance, wear face coverings, stay home if you're ill. Everything has that.
For us, I think the thing that we did more than anything else was we utilized the information that we were seeing pushed out by other, by folks like yourself or folks within Missoula, and tried to not do any posts that we generated internally that had any of that sort of information. We tried to use our posts internally to talk about things that we had going on, but we reposted an awful lot or shared an awful lot of information that we found to be good and useful information from Donna or from, Randy, from other places, agencies sort of folks, where we felt like we had a good conduit to our user by reposting that rather than trying to reinvent it ourselves. We really used our, pulpit to push the agenda of agencies that were talking about face masks and that sort of thing. So I don't think I did one post about wearing a face mask except that we required them in our store.
Yeah, there's an interesting piece of that when I look and to those of you who have participated on an incident command response, communication and how you communicate is probably the most important piece. There's actually the operations on the ground on, do you attack that fire or close this area down? Or, you would think that those are really important, but the communication piece from day one, it dominates the entire emergency response. And therefore, most incident response teams have what's affectionately known as the JIC, which is the Joint Information Center. And that serves as a common collecting point for anybody that's going to be involved in communicating. And sometimes that's government agencies, but it often includes non-government agencies and others who have a communication role. And getting your JIC team working really well together enables you to have a primary source of information so that messages are clear, they're all approved, they're all compared, and it's a constant exercise of trying to be fresh with the right information, getting it out, but making sure that it's been approved. And I can speak to my own frustration with that, because at times it becomes just an iron fist on what you can and can't communicate. It has to be approved through that, and that fidelity to that message seems a little preposterous at times, but you learn very quickly how the slightest misstep in how consistent that messaging is really starts to unravel once it gets out of your hand. And so as I think about that, the specific question around social media is really challenging for anybody responding to incidents these days, because despite how tight a control you can have on that messaging and making sure it's accurate, making sure it's science-based and really helping get the right information out, you just can't compete with a loud microphone coming from somewhere else sometimes. And so I think one of the things that you guys mentioned early on is maintaining that credibility and not losing your credibility. When that Joint Information Center pushed something out, people should be paying attention and taking that as the truth. And I think some of the tenets that you guys identified is saying what you don't know and being clear about that, owning the space on what you do know. Here is the most recent information, and this is why we're sharing it today. Are just so important for that kind of transparency and getting that information out. Any thoughts specific to the social media piece on how it's been super effective? And I'm thinking that with in the future, as we look at ways that we connect to users in a different way, the potential benefit of having connection to people immediately to be able to provide direction and guidance. Any thoughts from those of you that are more on the cutting edge with communicating to a bunch of people via social media platforms, how that might serve us even more to be able to respond quickly?
Our use of social media was really to reemphasize the consistent message. One of the things I do like about social media is we're able to release postings at all, obviously all times of day and night, and also to target those at maybe a specific set of trailheads, for example, to reach a particular audience. And we worked really hard to link the messages of access and use and the benefits and values of that access and use, and that it's not a one or the other. It's not a mask and a hike, or not a mask and whatever it is, but it's really about caring for our environment, caring for each other, and we're all in this together, respect. And by hitting people, I think, at the trailhead and giving them some good information about where they're going, that was a really helpful use of social media for us.
We have some partners that really were super honest. In fact, the city of Whitefish collaborated with their Convention and Visitor Bureau and their chamber. And when they went into shelter in place, they just filmed videos, and it was weekly. They sent out a message on social, and they just, grasped it and moved forward. And they were very honest, and they utilized social to get that message out. And that's a big audience, and it's immediate. You gotta love it. And it also allows you to engage in a conversation online. And you can't have a communications plan without social media. You just can't.
Yeah, I'm coming to that realization more and more, and it comes with its challenges as well as all the benefits. And I think that's a big part of managing that. So I'm just paying close attention to the clock. We have a couple minutes left. I did want to make sure I provided each of our panelists with an opportunity, if you wish. If you had any 1 minute, less than 1 minute final thoughts, any takeaways based off of in both your preparation for this panel discussion or anything from today's session that you wanted to share. And maybe I'll just go back in order with who I have in front of me on my screen. Maybe Brett, I might start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So the key takeaway I'd like to offer to people for this is to be prepared and to plan ahead. We don't know what the next major disaster is going to be and how it's going to impact your experiences, but figure out now who your partners are and start those conversations with them. And definitely include your first response agencies in that. So for fire and police and EMS, they want to talk about what your plans are so they can work with that. And probably even more important is to begin with your family. If your family is prepared for what that next disaster is, then you can spend time working on thinking about the other aspects, including your business or your organization and how it can respond to that incident.
Great, thanks, Brett. And I've lost track of my list. It's shuffled on me. Let's go to Donna. And you're still muted, Donna.
Stay positive. Continue to seek out the research, the latest information. Honesty, openness, all the way through. Empathy, and keep your eye on the long term and all of the benefits derived.
Great, thanks, Donna. Racene?
Don't go dark. Communicate with people. Whether if it's a business or a person, keep your communication strong in your family, your friends. If you're a business, let people know what's going on with you. Make sure that you're updating all your information on your website, your social media, your Google information. Just let people know what's happening, and yeah, stay in front.
Great, thanks, Racine. What do you think, Todd?
Well, for you know, from my personal perspective, it's really developing a better communication plan. I mean, it goes back to what Racine said. You know, we now have a document in our possession that says all the places where our hours are listed, all the places where all of those things happen. You know, it totally overwhelmed us. We changed our phone, but then Google didn't have the right hours when we were closed, and we bounced around quite a bit trying to get that information out. So really, we developed a, you know, when there's an incident that we need to react to, here's the sort of command sheet of what things need to happen. And I would just, you know, also there was a guy that taught wilderness and civ at the University of Montana for his entire career, and he used to use a line that that has stuck with me for my whole life, and that is, the best thing you can ever do for a group is to take care of yourself. And really, that's the mentality of all search and rescue. And you know, you're not going to be able to help that situation unless you're under control and you've got yourself taken care of. And that goes back to taking care of your family first, and then for me, my business, and you know, sort of taking care of those things that I have immediate control over. And I take that to heart every day. That's not a new thing for me, but developing that whole communication thing for us was very new. I really realized how many places our information was out there in the internet. You know, it's pretty crazy. So.
Well, great, everyone. I want to just extend a huge thank you for your time and your investment in preparing for this, and also let you know how much I've benefited from it personally. It's been really rewarding for me to get to spend some time with each of you a little bit more. And I'm hoping that those who took this in today were able to take some take homes. Sheena might have some reminders for you, but I will make a plug that the panelists were able to provide some resources in advance of this, some take home things that she can provide to you. I think it's some links to important information and other things. But outside of that, I just want to, again, thank you all for attending, and very much thank our panelists for taking the time to join us today. And not sure what you're going on to next as far as this conference goes, but get outside and take care of yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.